we have statistics that show when people are vulnerable and are able to share their personal struggles with their manager, it pays dividends to the culture itself. We boost trust, confidence, their ability to succeed. I think we want that for every single employee, to be feeling those things about themselves and their manager and the company as a whole.
You're listening to the Faith and Work podcast, where we explore ways to serve God and others in our daily work to bring life and hope to workplaces and cities.
Welcome to the Faith and Work podcast. I'm Ross Chapman. I serve as the CEO of Denver Institute for Faith and Work and as your host today. We started a series this year called Voices from the Workplace, which is really meant to highlight stories of people just living faithfully in their workplace and what that looks like in different industries. But what happens when we zoom out, not from one story and one industry, but from thousands of viewpoints? What's the story emerging from the workplace itself? Workplace culture, what is work today? We're doing something different today. We're going to listen to the data from the workplace. Our team at Denver Institute helped shape some of the data from research where we partnered with Barna Group and over a dozen other organizations on a project called Trends at Work. The data is rich, it's sometimes sobering, often hopeful, and it has a wide angle view of what's shaping American work culture today. So whether you're a CEO or an intern, a pastor, a teacher, if you're just your individual contributor, you're a manager, this is going to help you see the workplace with fresh eyes and your opportunity within it to shape the experience of people around you and your own journey with work. And so today we're excited to have Matt Randerson, who serves as the Vice President of Growth and Operations at Barna, join us to help unpack this data. Matt has been doing this for a little while with Barna. He's partnering with faith-based organizations, mission-driven businesses to kind of uncover strategic insights that really help them move their organization forward. He's got over a decade of experience. They've worked with Fortune 300 companies and also lots of churches and ministry programs. So Matt has a unique blend of business acumen, wisdom from all this research he's been doing, and insight from what's going on in the workplace because of all this research. He lives in Atlanta, and he's married and has a son, and he's driven by this passion for helping leaders have the data that they need to create flourishing organizations that lead to flourishing people. Matt, welcome to the Faith and Work podcast. We're so glad to have you.
Thanks, Ross. It's great to be here. Appreciate your team giving Barna and myself the space to share a few insights with you and hang out together today. It's great to be here.
Well, yeah, we definitely appreciate the work of Barna, and it was fun to be part of this project with other organizations. But yeah, maybe we could just jump in right there. Like, just kind of give us an overview of what was the Trends at Work research project? Why did Barna want to do it? Why did you want to work with a whole bunch of organizations? And what did the research really focus on?
Yeah, awesome. So the Trends at Work was an initiative that we started, and we just said, hey, we want to really do some research on the workplace. And we wanted to kind of crowdsource the perspectives to help shape the survey. You know, while we have obviously incredible research experts, people that can write great surveys, we really do believe in the power of collaboration and partnership. And so more than a dozen organizations all chipped in, including Denver Institute, on what do we need to research, why do we need to research it. And to that end, a little bit of what we love about this research project, nothing against some of the more mainstream research that you'll see out there, Gallup, Deloitte, McKinsey, all these firms, like, they do good research. It's really good stuff. But I think for us, a driving vision was this idea that in a moment when work is being reshaped and reimagined, we wanted to ask not just what is happening in the workplace, but who are we becoming because of it? So the tea leaves, or the sub-bullet to that, is this idea of human flourishing, that really we wanted to illuminate what is it on the relational and purpose-driven side of things that tend to go unmeasured in workplace surveys. So really down to the heart of this is individual flourishing and organizational flourishing are not separate pursuits, that they are deeply interconnected. So one goes, so goes the other. And so with the help of Denver Institute and all the other organizations, as I mentioned, we really got into some of the heart of that organizational individual flourishing.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to talk about some of the data today. And then we'll have an event later this summer where people can learn more about the event. If you're in the Denver area, we'd love for you to join. We'll share more about that later. But it was really good data. I mean, I really appreciated what came out of it. And it has a lot of implications for every worker. It has implications for Denver Institute and the work that we do. And it was just so fun to partner with so many organizations, who are passionate about this question of what is the role of work in society? What is the role of work in the individual's life? What's God's vision for work, and how do we live that out? And so this was really helpful stuff. So let's dive in just a little bit, Matt. But at Denver Institute, we say the problem that gets us up in the morning that we want to go tackle, or the one that keeps us up at night even, is that society lacks a compelling vision for work. And we think ultimate purposes for work are pretty clear in Scripture. We think God, first thing he wanted us to know about himself was that he was a worker and that he made us in his image as workers. But what did the data say? Does this come up? Does society have a compelling vision of work? Do they not? Do Christians have a different one than maybe non-Christians? Tell us what you found.
Yeah, so as with all data, you can kind of slice it and dice it to get all kinds of different answers. But I would say, generally speaking, we have a perspective on work that it has a lot of expectations. We are placing a lot of expectations on our workplace experience, whether that be social, obviously economical, relational, absolutely even emotional. So there's a little bit here where I would say work is in a little bit of a pressure cooker. We'll kind of unpack that a little bit here over the next several minutes. Also, the other things that I think is really special about this research is, with your help and so many others, we really tried to identify a way to study this. And so I want to offer up a little bit of that hopeful, compelling vision for what we can think about for today's workplace. And all of us as listeners, whether we are the CEO, the manager, or just an individual contributor, we can actually start to put some of our own brain energy and skill set around a framework. And this is what I would offer. There's a 3-part framework that we came up with in the research called, it was around influence, compassion, and change. So influence, what we define this as is, this is work's effect on us, and conversely, our effect on work. This plays out when we think about things like the pandemic. We all just, had to live within our houses and within our certain confines. And so what was exerted on us was an influence of, hey, many of us are staying home. Not all of us, but some of us are staying home. And then through the pandemic, a lot of us said, hey, we really like this idea of working at home, don't really want to go into the office. So there's an exerting of influence on the workplace to say, this is a preference that we have. And so this influence, not that it's a tug of war, but it's definitely a fluid thing where in seasons, you're seeing it right now, even in the business world, where this return to office or RTO, that is an element of influence that is being exerted on us, and it has an effect on how we work, where we work, how long we spend in the car commuting, or things like that. So I know that's not everyone's work situation, but that idea of influence is this give and take that is constantly moving between ourselves and the places that we work. And then the second thing that we would offer for this compelling vision for work is around compassion. Simply put, compassion is a response to a volatile world. The workplace culture crisis isn't merely about workload or policy, it's about something deeper. I think it's a little bit about the absence of compassion. We had argued that this is not a soft concept. This is actually a structural and spiritual force that shapes how people experience work, how they experience others, and how they view themselves in that process. And so really, compassion is almost a table stake. This is more than being nice and accommodating. This is actually something that we need to commit to within all of our organizations so that people feel honored and beloved in what they do. And then the last piece of this, offering that compelling vision for the workplace, is around change. So change is constant. We know that. this is something that it's our opportunity to steward. How do we steward change? And we'll talk about some things that we saw in the data around how we're feeling about changes, both good and maybe some changes that are not so good. And so I think it's a opportunity and an invite for every single person, all of us, to say we can actually be an active participant in change, that it's not a passive thing. So too often change feels like something we have to survive, or in some cases we even resist change, but we don't have to be passive recipients. We get to choose how we engage with it. We get to choose faith over fear. We get to choose imagination over anxiety, and we get to choose intention over just a simple reaction.
I love the lens, influence, compassion, change. It was really helpful. And Barna, as always, does a great job of just saying, okay, here's the data. Here's some things we think it means that you might be able to apply. And one of the things that sticks out to me when you're talking, Matt, is it doesn't matter what your level of agency is in the organization. You have some, no matter what your role is, even if it's the way you react to things, at minimum. But everybody has a chance to shape some kind of culture, be compassionate, how they navigate change. And, people's faith is influencing what they do at that agency. And I think that's really fun to see. Correct me if I get any stats wrong, all right, Matt, but I'm going to share one
sure.
on this purpose one. I believe you guys found that only 32% of employees say religious faith strongly motivates their work. What do you think about that? We were saying like, people lack a compelling vision and purpose for work. We would say your faith gives you, the Christian faith gives you a really compelling vision for work. Practically speaking, that's hard to work out sometimes, but it's there. So you react to that number, is that normal kind of in the data that you've seen before? And what would you say that really means?
Yeah, so you are correct on the statistic there. So well done. I think behind the question, I imagine, what does that mean for my religious faith strongly influences how I basically show up at work? Part of it is how does my faith show up at work? That's a question that I think is behind the question. And I don't know that we've entirely given people some, let's call it kind of clear tracks to run on, or even some ideas. We talk a lot about vision and, the incredible work that you do at Denver Institute. I've been following you guys for years, of helping people capture that vision for what does faith mean for how I'm motivated, how I show up at work, how I influence. And we've made good progress, but the statistic in and of itself implies that there's more work to be done and more progress to be made, which is really great. That's encouraging. I hope actually, as we look at the statistic, we're not discouraged, but we're deeply encouraged. And with all research, it's like an oak tree. The perfect time to plant one was, 50 years ago. If we could have asked that question 50 years ago and tracking it over the last 50 years, I would suspect that we've seen a move northward in that number. So I'm encouraged, but also there's a long way to go on it.
Yeah, even just thinking back, we're very familiar with your first report on work from 2018. I forget the name of it, but you guys did a pretty big study on Christians in the workplace. And if I remember right, it's around 72% that would still have a disconnect between their faith and their work, where they are actually experiencing that. So that's, 28% to 32% now, seems like, we've progressed a little bit. And I do think that there's a growing number of faith and work organizations and people talking about work. And I think that is helping. So that's cool to see, but it also means if society lacks a compelling vision for purpose and 32% of people say they're primarily driven, they have a motivation for their work because of their faith, that just also means people who don't have a faith or maybe come from a different faith background who doesn't really, with maybe that perspective doesn't talk about work, there's so much more opportunity to help people make those connections. And I think that can lead to some of the questions that you guys further get into, like how to shape culture and, feeling celebrated at work or celebrating your employees at work. Like some of that stuff came out too. So I just wanted to point out, I think it's still a really big problem, and it's also some encouraging news as well. And there are organizations and resources out there that can help people with that. Yeah. So just Would love for you to help us think through some more of the data. So if you've got one that comes to mind, feel free. And while you're thinking about it, I'm going to give you one that's around this idea of not very many people feel seen at their work, but some do. I think you guys had about 1 in 3 workers feel seen by their leaders. Only 38% feel celebrated at work. What does that tell you as if you're in the employee's shoes or if you're in the manager's shoes? What does that look like and what could be different?
Yeah, so some of you're again correct on citing the data there. So appreciate that, Ross. We asked people the question, take a moment to reflect on your primary boss or manager and how true would you say each of these following are. One was my manager cares about me as a person, not just as an employee. That's about 41%, completely true. So I would say there's some positive notes to take away from that. We're not just viewing the people that we work for or work for us as simply just kind of functions and tools, but we're actually seeing people for who they are, which is great. And then you cited that idea that 1 in 3 workers just truly feeling seen. I want to pair that with one other statistic, which is 28% answering the question, I can be vulnerable with my manager about my personal struggles. So it's not a great podcast unless you cite Brene Brown. So here we are.
There you go.
And Brene, she is so incredible in her own research ways and also her practicality around vulnerability. She lived it out in her own way over the last couple of decades, but the research here and hers and many others continue to point to this idea that vulnerability is such a critical asset in the workplace, particularly in our relationships with our managers. So vulnerability can be everything from, hey, I'm feeling a little bit, maybe a little off on something and working on a project, or it could also be vulnerability about what's happening in our personal lives. I think the idea of bringing more of our full selves into the workplace, that does have complexity with it for sure, but it goes back to that idea that the workplace is starting to take on more weight and expectation. And so when we are experiencing something on the weekend or we're experiencing a challenge within our family or personal lives, we are more inclined to probably want to bring that into the workplace. And so I know that requires more energy of all of us, but I think it's our opportunity, whether we are individuals or managers, to recognize that vulnerability is a part of the human experience. It's a part of the way that God designed us. Vulnerability opens us up to care for one another, to administer compassion, as we talked about in the framework. And so for all of us, how can we actually help cultivate a sense of trust and vulnerability in our workplaces, because it's pretty essential to the experience.
Well, I love that the research pointed to that. And I do think it's like a constant, you just have to navigate, can I share my personal life at work? And it's a wisdom kind of conversation probably. And is that person a person I trust to share that with? But also it creates an opportunity that I think is largely missing in society. And you said earlier, like, we're asking work to do a lot. And I think the intensity of feeling isolated and lonely drives us to see, oh, these people that I talk to every day, I actually need to be and want to be in relationship with them. I want them to know me. I want to know them. And I think that's really important for Christians who go to their workplaces every day, to recognize people are longing for relationships where they feel seen and known and cared for. And you probably want that too as a Christian going to the workplace, but it's such a great opportunity that we want to, challenge us to say, hey, like, what can we do to create those kind of relationships where people feel seen and celebrated and they can have a conversation about something hard in their life with the people they work with, because, you spend the majority of your time with them. So it'd be great to know them. Yeah. So that was a great data point for sure.
Yeah. And Ross, I want to add onto this, because I know we're in the midst of a little bit of a conversation where someone might say, well, this all seems really nice, but how does this actually help my company? I understand performance. I understand those needs that at the end of the day, they are hard, tangible metrics and things that we are trying to do within our companies. Let me just make a little bit of a pitch here. So what we see in the data, 58% of people who have shared their personal struggles with their manager, here's the good that comes from it. And we see this statistically. People feel more supported in the workplace. they trust their manager more, they feel more connected to their team and are more confident in their ability to succeed at work, and they feel closer to their manager, and the list goes on and on and on. So
Hmm.
if someone is maybe just like looking at this with a critical eye and saying, vulnerability, compassion, wow, that's interesting, but I don't know how this contributes to the tangibility of my company or even my company's culture. We have statistics that show when people are vulnerable and are able to share their personal struggles with their manager, it pays dividends to the culture itself. We boost trust, confidence, their ability to succeed. I think we want that for every single employee, to be feeling those things about themselves and their manager and the company as a whole.
Thanks for listening. My name is Marcy McGovern, and I'm delighted to serve on the board of directors for Denver Institute. As a financial advisor, I have experienced and want others to experience the paradigm shift that happens when we see our everyday work as pleasing to God and as a way to love our neighbors. Programming like the Faith and Work podcast catalyzes this change, and we are just getting started. As Denver Institute pursues its mission to prepare people to serve God and others through their daily work, we look forward to seeing our workplaces and cities transformed. But that cannot happen without the support of our listeners. If you've been encouraged by what you've heard on the Faith and Work podcast, or if your life has been shaped by a Denver Institute event, the fellowship, a cohort, or our many publications, I encourage you to financially support this mission. Whether you join me as a monthly partner or give a one-time gift, your support helps workers, workplaces, and communities experience the hope and the life that Christ provides. Visit the Give page at denverinstitute.org. That's denverinstitute.org.
Well, some of you listening probably need to rewind a few seconds and go remind yourself of all those great benefits.
Yeah.
And really what you're talking about is employee retention and talent attraction. It's a huge win for your company to have a culture like that, where your employees can say, I feel supported. Actually, that reminds me, Matt, of like one of the things that stuck out to me in the data, and you guys pointed this out, but if people feel supported, that's like, I don't know how you would say it. You have to characterize it, but like the highest indicator of, they're going to stay, they're going to be satisfied in their job, they're going to be productive. As a contrast, like feeling purpose in your work was lower than that. So just like help us understand what that research was.
Yeah. So we found in the research that 7 in 10 people would say that they're satisfied with their job. That's actually that's a pretty great headline number. Mm-hmm. Most of us are experiencing a level of satisfaction within our jobs. However, and to your point, that satisfaction doesn't necessarily correlate perfectly to retention, because what we also see is 58% of people are saying that they're open to finding something else. So, hey, I'm here, I'm satisfied, but I might have an eye on job boards. Like I might be, there's a likelihood that someone's kind of shopping around. What do we do with that? I think there's a couple of things. We have to recognize the context and the backdrop through which all of these data points can be considered. So just think about the last, let's call it 24 months of the workplace, or even 5 years or so. We saw the Great Resignation, we saw the Great Reshuffling, all these different kind of buzzwords to describe people recognizing that for either for their own economic gains or for uncertainty reasons, that loyalty level within an organization just has not been quite as strong as we probably would hope. Let me give a good piece of news. What we see in the data is actually the thing that does have a connection and a correlation to engagement, retention, is relationships. So relationships actually rank even higher than long-term opportunities and even salary. So if I'm feeling satisfaction in my workplace relationships, that could be my coworkers, my manager, that has a stronger tie to, let's call it retention, than does many other things. So relationships are, as they say, relationships are key, and that is currently true within the workplace experience.
So translation, if you're a manager of a team, you don't necessarily need to think as much potentially about paying your team better or thinking about their long-term advancement, which you should definitely think about those things. But
Yeah.
you might just actually try to really get to know them and create a culture where they know each other so that they have that sense of connection and that they feel seen and they belong.
Yep. Yeah.
That's,
And I have friends that are managers, and you hear stories over the last several years where companies have just like thrown money at people to try to get them to stay or try to make them happy. There's some benefit to that, but really, I don't think that actually has as much sticking and staying power as we think it does. In some ways, I think it actually maybe creates more complexity and problems. I'm not saying that we shouldn't give people raises, but actually for the sake of everyone's well-being, because if we're saying individual and organizational flourishing are connected, maybe there's some things that we need to consider at this influence, compassion, change, and these deeper level, this desire to know and be known. If we can create that within our workplaces, I actually think we boost some of these attraction, retention, engagement numbers.
well, yeah, I agree. And let's stay on that manager-employee relationship. I mean, you guys, I think the data would say this is like a key driver for people feeling satisfied, for staying in their company. I think Gallup has suggested this. Matt, you're the researcher, so you tell me if this is wrong. But I'm pretty sure Gallup has basically suggested their research says people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. Yeah. And what we need is great managers. So managers are shaping the work experience of millions of people every day.
Yes.
Is that a continuing trend in this research that you guys found?
Yeah, and not just our research, but other kind of secondary observations and sources. What I would call it is there's a lot of money being dumped into the middle of the organization. So let's call it that manager level, because exactly for some of those statistics, recognizing how important those relationships are. We all probably have stories in our past of like, let me tell you what my life looked like when I had an awesome manager. I can think of one exactly right now. I think of his name. And then there's also times when we can look back on our careers and say, I had a terrible manager. And you probably describe that experience, and not just that experience, but even that season of life as probably a little less rosy and less enjoyable than others. So the manager relationship is just so critical. And you are seeing that, whether it's new tools, capabilities, training, consulting, frameworks, all that kind of stuff, it is really starting to center even more on that manager.
Well, just if you're listening and that's your role, just take that to heart and think about how you can bring that into your workplace in a different way. And if you may be a manager one day, think of this and say, hey, I want to be that kind of manager. I want people to go, I loved working with that person. Well, let's pivot a little bit, Matt. One of the things that Barna is, more known for is obviously exploring how faith intersects with the workplace, or all your other research has that kind of driving factor. What did you guys find in terms of differences between people who are saying, I show up with my faith in my workplace, and people who say it's not really that important? Are there differences in their experience of work and how they show up?
Yes, there are differences. And actually, to work through the next few data points, I want to offer up an additional refinement for how to think about the Christian population. So we at Barna, we've developed what we call practicing Christians and non-practicing Christians. This is not a statement of who's a better Christian, who's not. This is just statistically a framework that we can use for thinking about the population, because consistently the differences between these two segments are pretty clear. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So thinking the whole Christian population, we're going to talk about what we call practicing Christians. So this is those that identify with a Christian denomination. They attend a worship service at least once a month, and they say that their faith is very important to them in their life. That's the practicing Christian, which makes up about 20% of all Christians. And then there's the other segment of Christians, what we call non-practicing Christians. So, faith is still a part of their life. They don't go to church as frequently, and they don't have a kind of stated affiliation with the denomination. This is about 80% of all Christians. So again, this is not a judgment call on, hey, those people are bad Christians. This is just a way for us to look at data and make more sense of it. So now that we've got practicing Christians and non-practicing Christians in our hands here to work with, let's take a look at what we found in some of the data specifically related to the workplace. So we asked this question: thinking about your current workplace, how true would you say each of the following are? I'm going to just give you 4. We gave them about 12 different options, but here are 4 that I want to highlight. So my workplace provides adequate resources for employees who struggle with mental health or well-being. Number 2, my leaders are compassionate and caring towards employees. Number 3, my workplace fosters connection between coworkers. And lastly, I am inspired by my company's leadership. Those are just 4 quick examples of we're asking, tell us about your current workplace and how true are each of these. What we find in the data, and this is agnostic of generations, is that practicing Christians almost consistently score twice as high as non-practicing Christians in their agreement with those statements. So if you look at practicing Christian Gen Z and millennials, 50% of them would say, I am inspired by my company's leadership. If you take non-practicing Christian Gen Z and millennials, just 25% of them would say that I am inspired by my company's leadership. So why does this matter? I think there's a connection here between one's, let's call it vibrancy in faith, and how they view and experience the workplace. So again, if we try to boil this down to what do we do with this data, I think we can be excited when we see people in our workplaces that have vibrant faith because it has a connection to their positive outlook on the workplace experience. And that is something important for us to pay attention to, that practicing Christians, and this is, again, I want to be careful we're not putting them on a pedestal, but like practicing Christians have a propensity to view the workplace experience in a very much more positive way than perhaps non-practicing Christians. And also, the last point to this, people that have no faith actually are closer in their views and perspectives than non-practicing Christians. So non-practicing Christians and people of no faith tend to think and view things similarly than practicing Christians.
Well, Matt, there's a lot to react to and think about in those, and even the 2 categories. And I like how you guys actually name them and just from the data say, here's what we say a practicing Christian does. These are the activities that they do, and here's how they're showing up in their workplace differently. And my takeaway on that is, we're trying to help people connect the dots between faith and work. And it's really that you're bringing your faith to your work. And it's really because you've decided to follow Jesus, you've recognized that means my entire life is in submission to him. So wherever I go, my neighborhood, my workplace, my church life, with the nonprofit I support, my family, etc. It's everything. And I think that's what those practicing Christians they're experiencing that in a way that's actually visible in the data, which is super encouraging. So that's an encouragement to all of us to say, like, hey, these things that we want to do together as a community that are important to us, we go to worship together, we pray, we read the Bible. These things matter in how we actually live our lives, even if it may not be super intentional. It just kind of shows up. Yeah. Well, we're getting close on time, but there's a few more questions I want to get to. So maybe we'll just do a couple of these rapid. But you guys did a whole section of research on CEOs called CEO Insights. So I think it was like 350 CEOs. I just what stuck out to you? Like what should we know that you learned about CEOs that would be interesting to us that maybe we wouldn't hear other places?
Yeah. So one of the things that's surprising in the data, or perhaps not, but something that stood out to us, is that the feeling of loneliness and burnout is very high for CEOs, and it's actually similar to the overall workforce population. So 20% of CEOs say that they always or often are feeling lonely at work, and 19% are saying they always are often feeling burned out. Those numbers are very similar for non-CEOs. So maybe there's comfort in recognizing, hey, loneliness and burnout is a common shared experience whether you're the CEO or you're a manager or an individual contributor. One other data point that stands out is self-criticism tends to be a defining experience for CEOs. We asked, how often do you feel a variety of things at work? And one of those was feeling critical of myself. 56% of CEOs said that they always or often feel critical of themselves at work. That is in comparison or contrast to all workers would say just 34% would say I always or often feel critical of myself at work. So you got 56% of CEOs and 34% of the larger workforce struggling or having these feelings of self-criticism while in the workplace. So it's an interesting and important observation for us to consider.
Yeah. So your top level person in the organization, is feeling critical of themselves, is feeling burnout and stress like you. And that just might humanize them a little bit more. The further away you are in relational connection to the CEO, it may be harder to do that. So I thought that was really good findings.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I would say that I noticed in that insights for CEOs was sometimes it appears, this is my paraphrase. So Matt, you correct me if I'm wrong, but my paraphrase would be that CEOs feel a desire to know their employees, care about their employees, and listen to them. But employees don't often feel like that is the case. There seemed to be like a bit of a disconnect there. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. There was, I would say, a positive note of what is shared between CEOs in the workplace was increased this focus on employee well-being. Overall, like you said, employee engagement, feedback, focus on personal professional development. These are things that are shared very positively from a viewing perspective, both by CEOs and the total workforce. And I do think that there is some work to be done, because I would be curious to know if you put some of that data in front of someone who wasn't a CEO and say, do you experience this to be true? Do you feel like your CEO or CEOs broadly place this level of emphasis on employee well-being? I'd be curious to know that statistic. And I think there might be some work to be done there where CEOs both can have very tangible, let's call it, tools in their toolbox for how they can express and prioritize these things. And I also think if for non-CEOs, there's ways to help them be more receptive to a CEO's willingness and desire to hear feedback, to understand and prioritize their well-being, their development, things like that. So we're actually not that far off within the data, but I think there's maybe some work to do a little bit in our perceptions of one another.
That's good. Well, we're going to be diving into a lot more data at an event coming up. And actually, Denver Institute, Barna, and Thrivent are all hosting this event together. And I'm super pumped about it. It's August 27th, right before Labor Day. And we are in the business of making sure people know about Labor Day, because all about people connecting their faith and their work. But it's called Culture is What You're Really Leading. And we'll be able to share more data and insights. And we've got a special guest speaker. Matt, tell us a little bit about Jenny.
Yeah, Jenny Catron, she's a great friend. She's really spearheading some great work in helping organizations build healthy, thriving cultures. And so Jenny in the organization she leads, they also participate in the Trends at Work Co-op. So it's going to be a great time just getting to be really immersed with both data, but also people that are practitioners and experts helping tangibly build great culture via Jenny's team. So it's going to be a really great time together. Obviously, getting to connect and network with one another is always valuable. And so I know that will take place at the event as well. And so, like you said, Labor Day is an important thing, and it's important that we recognize it. And I can't imagine a better way to spend, a couple hours right before we go rest, taking time to invest in understanding your culture. Ross, you and I have both talked about this, our teams, and have been praying that people would come to this event. And the most important thing we want them to imagine is that they feel encouraged and energized walking away from the event. And so that's what we're going to focus on, and looking forward to hopefully meeting some of you at the event.
That's right. So if you're in the Front Range listening, it's going to be in Denver area, August 27th. If you're not in the Front Range and you can't make it, we'll still figure out ways for you to engage with the data, and we'll encourage you along the way on the podcast and through the Denver Institute website. Matt, we love to leave our guests kind of with the final word. So I'd love to just let you kind of, what's one of these insights that we can really put into practice or that really gave you hope, and just encourage us with that final thought.
Yeah. So one of the things I'll offer is something to wrestle with is what I mentioned at the beginning. It is indeed the complexity of the weight that the workplace seemingly is taking on. I think the dust is still settling on how we view our relationship with work. I think as younger generations get into the workforce and as they spend time in it, I think they kind of start to right size their expectations. Some of that is that's just the natural course of life. But nonetheless, I think there's some really important trends that we need to pay attention to. So the complexity is pretty high. I also have a tremendous amount of hope that we are leaders are more hungry than ever to want to understand the complexity and want to do something about it. So it's one thing to recognize that, hey, there's a lot going on and you kind of just like, wow, this is just so overwhelming. I'm going to stick my head in the sand and hopefully it gets better. But I don't see that. I actually get a lot of hope that leaders are saying they're wanting to lean into the complexity. So I get a lot of hope with all of that. And so I don't know, what about you, Ross? Is there anything that you're seeing either from the data or just broadly that you're leaning on with a lot of hope right now?
Well, I think just a faithful presence in the workplace from practicing and non-practicing Christians who decide they want to do that can make such a big difference. Our visions that every person's work would bring hope and life to their city, but that could be their place, their workplace, and their community. So to me, that this data says that's possible, and we have the opportunity to do that. So that's what encourages me. And so Matt, thanks so much for being on. I'm so excited for the event coming up, but this was just a joy to talk through the data with you a little bit. And hopefully you guys are all encouraged listening in. Matt, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Ross. We appreciate it.
Well, you've just heard a whole bunch of data points and gotten the impression that there's a lot of work that we can do in our workplaces to help shape the culture around us. And so I want to leave you all, as you're listening here, with just the last couple questions. What kind of person is your work forming you into? Is this something that you think about? Is it making you look more like Jesus, less like Jesus? Is it moving you towards the kind of person you want to be or not? How is that actually happening? And then the second question is, what kind of culture are you helping create in your workplace? It doesn't matter the agency level you have, whether you're at the top of the organization or if you're just starting off in a workplace and you're at the bottom of the organization hierarchy. You have the opportunity to influence the culture that you are working in. So the data tells us what's happening, but it's up to us to respond to that data in a way that honors God and serves others. And for Denver Institute, we hope that it would be in a way that you would bring hope and life to your workplace. So hopefully you were challenged and encouraged by this conversation. We'd love for you to share it with someone in your workplace, maybe somebody at your church, maybe a friend. I'd love for you to share it with them and then maybe even talk about some of this data. And if you want to go deeper into these findings, just follow along with us on our social media or go to denverinstitute.org, where you can learn about the event we're hosting on August 27th and more about this data. As always, we're so grateful for you listening along and the way that you try to live out your faith at your workplace. Thanks so much.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Faith and Work podcast, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a friend. The Faith and Work podcast is produced by Denver Institute. We believe that when Christians work faithfully, the world will taste the hope and life that Jesus provides. To learn more or to make a financial contribution, visit denverinstitute.org.